Good evening. It's Paranormal Science Lab Live. I'm Lisa.
I'm Jim.
I'm Susan. I'm Caitlin.
She did.
I'm Benton.
And Benton's lurking as usual. We are very pleased tonight to have our guest, Stephen LaChance. Stephen, how are you doing?
I'm doing good, thank you.
And we're really excited because we're going to be with Stephen next weekend, next Saturday, for 2 events in the Joplin, Carthage area. I don't know, it's taken us years, but we're finally getting you down here.
Yeah, I'm excited. I actually can't wait to get there. So it's been a long time, but yeah, it's been a long time coming.
Well, Saturday afternoon for everybody, we're having an event at the Joplin Public Library. Stephen's going to be giving a presentation on his new book, Confrontation with Evil, that covers the 1949 Exorcist case. That's the basis of the book by Blatty and the movie. And I can say that I loved Confrontation with Evil and actually read it in one day. And I think Jim really enjoyed it as well.
3 days. And only because I needed to sleep.
And then next Saturday evening at 8 o'clock, we are going to be at the Kendrick House in Carthage, which is the oldest house in this area, and have an investigation with Stephen. And I think it's going to be a great time, and I'm excited. Stephen, why don't you jump in and how did we get to this point with this book?
With this book?
Yeah.
Well, the thing is I've always had an interest in this case for years. You cannot grow up, and you went to school in St. Louis, so you know how this is.
Oh, yeah.
You cannot be part of this community of the St. Louis area without hearing about this story and all the urban legends that surround it and the stories that go around it and all of that as well. And so that's when, you just kind of grow up with it and you get interested in it. Well, I went through my own paranormal experience in 2001, and really it's what got me started in all this. And so one of the places that when I decided to look for answers was actually this case. I figured, well, if you're gonna look into this kind of thing and you're going through it, what's the best thing to do? Well, go through the cases that are well known. And in this case, in St. Louis, it was the one mansion. It was also the case of the Exorcist, the young boy that was possessed in 1949. So I started looking into those things. And then the reason really was to find answers in the beginning for myself about what these things are and how they work. And I wasn't with the intent of ever writing it into a book. I never thought about doing that until later. And then I kind of put it on the back burner. And in fact, I was going to write a book about haunted St. Louis. And then there was some suggestion you made that maybe this is the story that I should be writing, since I had been researching it for those years. And I was like, I still wasn't too sure. And then I moved to St. Louis, because I lived in Union, Missouri, which is about 45 minutes west from St. Louis. So then I moved to St. Louis in 2013. And from that point on, it's in the book. One of the first things that happens, I walk up the street in the neighborhood, which, by the way, was the same neighborhood where the Exorcist occurred, where the boy was, the hospital is that they performed the exorcism on him. And so I walked up the street. There's a church at the top of the street with a courtyard, a Catholic church. And I looked in the courtyard, and there was a statue of St. Anthony without his head. And I stopped, and it was one of those moments of inspiration where, anybody that's a fan of The Exorcist, one of the big things that you see in the books, reading the books and the films, by the way, is there's always the religious icons that are always without their head.
Yes.
So the open music's going off and everything, in my mind. And I sat sat down and I started thinking about it. And I'm sitting there in the middle of the neighborhood where this happened. I mean, we're talking just literal, maybe 4 blocks away.
Wow.
Okay. Yeah, when she showed me the house kind of looks like the Amityville. And I thought, well, this is crazy. The house looks like Amityville to the neighborhood of the Exorcist. I don't think so, but actually, it's a pretty good place. But, so anyway, so I'm sitting here and I decided to go ahead and at that point, and I go through all the book, how I decide that it's something I should look into and maybe write a book. And that's when I started. It was way before all of the hoopla around, well, you know that, Lisa, because we've been talking about it for years.
Yeah.
It was all of the hoopla around, the exorcism, the exorcism live show and all, but I was already writing. I was, in fact, already done writing it.
I remember that.
Yeah, it was in those stages of edit at that point when they did that show. So I found great interest in that in some ways, but I don't know. Anyway, there you go. That's how I got into it.
It's always interesting how we kind of get pulled along in this field from one thing to another, and then kind of circle back around. I have a lot of questions going through my mind, but one thing that is interesting, we talked about this a little earlier, and this might be a little preface. One thing you stress in the book is how greed is an opening to this phenomena. And then actually today was announced that the Dibbit box that was the focus of the movie The Possessed has recently been sold and is now being promoted for monetary gain. And I just thought that was kind of ironic that as an illustration of potential greed that may end up having effects that are unforeseen.
Well, anytime, to understand greed, as far as is one of the things that leads to all this,
Right.
And when you're dealing with something among it that is a demonic nature, which the Dibbit box, which in this case, religion's going to play a part in it, whether you personally would like it to or not.
Right.
It does. And there's reasons that these things, I'll give you an example. When priests go in to do exorcisms, they do not accept money. There have actually been in cases where checks have been torn up. And, and the reason for that, and the reason that we don't accept money for the things that we do, as far as helping other people in helpful in these situations, as soon as that green monster comes involved, as soon as you start letting that control, and I think we've seen this with this case time and time again, by the way, throughout history, even from the beginning. This case was built around greed. The boy's case in the possession was all built around the greed, and we go into great detail about that. But literally, at one point, it becomes quite clear that the mother was looking for a certain amount of monetary gain from money that was buried, and she actually was using her boy as a question in the process, actually, in essence, turning him into a human Ouija board or an oracle himself.
Right.
Which is interesting to me. And, by the way, what really got me about that is that no one's ever talked about that before. No one ever saw it, or I don't understand how they couldn't see it because it's right there in the diary. You see it. It's quite clear. It's in black and white. But, the fact that she was using the idea for monetary gain is she was selling herself and her son down the river. And I think we see this now in connection with the Dibbit box. We're seeing the same thing here. And I don't think that will end well.
I don't either.
I don't wish bad on it, but
no.
I don't think it'll end well.
No. It just, I just thought, oh, that's a bad idea. But I just thought it was that's such another perfect illustration of what you were saying in the book. And I
You know,
agree.
it's like the boy that cries wolf. You know,
Mm-hmm.
with this particular individual, you know, the purchasing of a demonic house at one point, and now this, you know, at some point this person's going to get in some type of trouble, and nobody's going to believe him because it's going to be the boy that cried wolf.
Well,
You know?
that's true. I mean,
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
oh no, you're fine. No, that's true, and that was my thought because of all the exaggeration that's used with anything that he encounters. Then, when something really bad happens, it's gonna exactly be the boy who cried wolf. I'm afraid.
I don't believe he's actually had something really bad happen to him yet, or he would not be doing the things that he's doing.
I don't either.
There's something about these cases that you really, you know, walks like a duck, talks like a duck, that kind of thing. You know, it's a duck. Well, he's not walking the walk, talking the talk of someone that's been through something like this at this point.
No.
And I would say that he probably hasn't to that extent. But you know, the thing is why tempt the faith? Why continue this, you know, what is the fascination with the demonic that you keep wanting to bring it to you? I'd have to question that. You know, it's interesting to me that, again, it's the fame monster, which comes out of greed as well.
Exactly.
So, there you go.
Yeah, but I think you can go back to the old adage that if you play with fire long enough, you're going to get burned.
Well, yeah, and it's, you know, that was one thing. I got to tell you, that was one thing about doing this book that made me nervous, because I knew in some ways that I could get in a little bit of trouble doing this one. You know, and I think and I'm very clear about that. You know, I mean, when I'm writing, and when you read in the book of me saying something like, well, I worry that I might be going down this road too. I meant it. I mean, I was really worried about messing with this too much, you know, because of the things that surround it. However, there was, I thought it was valuable that if I was going to do a story and I was going to paint out how these things work in something, I was going to need to do something that everybody was interested in. And the majority of people, if you tell them, hey, are you interested in The Exorcist, you know, anybody that's interested in horror or anything along those lines is probably going to tell you yes.
Yeah.
So it was the perfect case to do that type of examination. And it was the perfect case to show how these things work. Because, first of all, that interest draws people in to begin with.
Well, I agree with you, and I think that people really don't have an understanding of how the forces work and how vulnerable people can be. And I can understand your concern for yourself as you were doing it, because I know situations I've dealt with that there can be ramifications to people who are not even directly involved, depending on the circumstances. So it certainly is the case.
But you kind of drive to a little bit, I think, when you start focusing. And in this case, I got a story for you guys will love.
Okay.
First day of writing the book, okay? I've been researching and gathering all my research, you know, and those of you that have read the book know that a lot of that, the actual investigation started actually over 10 years ago, like 12 years ago, actually. So, you know, it's gathering the stuff and then putting all the research, cataloging everything together, and then you get that moment where you sit down to write the first day. And I sit down, so I write to music, and I always say that, you know, people should hear a soundtrack to the music, to the books I write, because I do listen to music. So the first day I'm listening to Ave Maria, I start writing the book. My dog, it was Elliot's dog, she's going back and forth, and she's a border collie, and she keeps going back to the stairs and growling up the stairway. I even go and look and see what's going on and see what she's growling at. I can't see nothing. So I back down, Ave Maria playing, dog growling, not understanding what's up with her. All of a sudden, there's a boom, 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 knock at the door. And I go go to the door, and I open the door, and there's two guys in black ties at the door, and they said, do you believe in Jesus? And I looked at him, I said, you got to be kidding me. And I closed the door. Out of shock. I think they were just as shocked as I was, but I was really shocked. And I was like, they had no idea that I was inside writing this book about the devil. I go immediately to the phone, and I called my editor, and I said, we're doing the right book.
Yep. Yeah. That's great.
We're doing the right book.
I can understand the trepidation and the worry just from investigating the case, and I know you make money off the books, but you're not doing it from a greed aspect. You're wanting to spread the story and try to get as much of the truth out. And I know in your book you said you had to, kind of fill in the blank, so to speak. But it still, to me, it's a different thing than what's going on with the Dybbuk box. That's for pure fame and monetary gain.
Yeah, that was... that's true, but you can still, but you look at it and you go, well, you can still be just as guilty of, because I did, and I think, you read the book, you guys know what I'm talking about. There's a point where I actually turn that over to myself and go, am I doing the same thing here?
Right.
Yeah.
Am I doing this for what purpose? And that question was really an important question, but I think with the Dybbuk box, I think it's more, there's serious research and serious writing done for serious purpose. And then there's things that are done on the lines of P.T. Barnum.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A sideshow. That's a sideshow.
Yeah.
That's, we remember Jurassic Park where the old man sitting there and he's talking about the flea circus, Mm-hmm. I think he thinks that's his version of a flea circus that he can sell tickets to.
Well, I have
a feeling it's going to be a little bit more real than you think.
Yeah. I just get the whole idea from the whole museum concept that he's touting, that it's, I just get visions of, Las Vegas Wax Museum, people going through but it's, paranormal items, and so...
Yeah, the idea of the haunted item museum is not new.
No.
It's been done. Mm-hmm. And it's been done well.
Yeah.
Very well. I don't think you could do it much better.
I agree with you there.
So I don't know what he thinks he's going to accomplish. However, I think you see someone there, and I think we have seen this over and over again. In paranormal, what I call paranormal entertainment. Yeah. When the popularity starts to fall off, you'll see them do things that are irrational and kind of crazy, trying to maintain or hold on to
what they've got.
Their fleeting 15 minutes.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah. And that's what I think is the big doorway there. And I'm like you. I really had never heard about the connection with, that there was a monetary issue with the aunt, that they were looking for her money and all of that. But I kept thinking, were the priests just sort of, either one, just not putting that aspect in the journal, or were they just ignoring it as something other than religious? But
well, I think you have to look at the journal for what it is first.
Right.
To understand, where if that journal was not meant for public consumption, number one.
Right.
It was an internal document that was meant for inside the church. Now, keeping that in mind, it makes it a very important document to the case because it's very truthful in that sense. Mm-hmm. However, also keep in mind that it's not going to go into detailed explanation, let's say, like you would do with the public.
Right.
However, in the case of the thing where we talk about the mother and what's going on, it's pretty clear in the journal exactly what's going on. I mean, it actually says, this form of questioning of these paranormal people that understand the stuff that we do and how it works, looking at this case, tearing this case apart so they can present it. But the fact of the matter is they never had an understanding of the case to begin with, which is kind of frustrating to me. I don't understand why they couldn't see that for what it was. Because, Lisa, honestly, I mean, you would have sat down and read this. I think you would have saw it because you do the same kind of work I do.
Well, yeah, I mean...
You know,
I mean, that once I was reading through and what was in the diary, it's like, well, it's very obvious what was going on. Now, perhaps people from the paranormal field who were tearing it apart were afraid if they presented that there would be hysteria, that paranormal investigations would open doors to demonic possession all the time. I'm not sure, but it seems to me that it has just been overlooked.
It has been, and if you know that moment when you realize that you're about to break. Can you imagine? I was about to bust into pieces before this book came out.
Oh, I bet.
Because I knew I was about to break this case wide open in a way that it's never been told before. With proof, you can't get any more proof than the priest that was present at the Exorcist. I was extremely excited at that extent because I realized that. But at the same time, I was very frustrated. I was very confused of why it had never been done before. How this one piece of information, which anybody that knows that we're always looking for that piece in a case, and it's always in the you know this, Lisa. It's the last moment in a case where that last piece falls into place, and boom, you understand it.
Exactly.
Everything comes together. It's that piece of that case, and I don't know why it took us, almost 60 years to get to that point, or 67 years actually.
Well, weren't there paranormal teams that researched that? I mean, at that time.
Well, yeah.
I don't understand.
What was interesting? You had the Lutheran minister from Maine.
Yeah.
From Maryland. You had him. He was actually in contact. He was interested in the paranormal. Was actually in contact with the Rhine Institute.
I remember you said that.
So there, but the frustrating part of it is when you get into it and you start seeing everything that's going on. Every single person, up to the point when he meets the priest in St. Louis, every single person that should have been there for him up to that point lets him down in some way.
Yeah, that's what I was. I can't imagine, if we walked into a case and saw a mother basically using their child as a planchet, how you can't do something about that. That doesn't, because I figured out before you finally revealed it.
I mean, in 1949, the social services probably, there wouldn't have been any stepping in. How do you explain that? I do believe, and you know this too. I do believe that at some point she realizes the damage she caused, and I believe, she kind of leaves the story for a while.
Yeah.
There's indication in a sentence that, and it's one sentence you gotta really read because it's there, but it's one sentence that pretty much lets you know that she's had a breakdown of some sort. And so I find that interesting. That oftentimes we look at possession, and especially with cases of children, that the actual target of that possession is not the child, it's the parent. In this case, it was classic. Mm-hmm. It was classically going after this parent. And by the time that it did what it wanted to do to her, which I think it wanted to take her even further off the edge, but at that point, he was so far gone at that point that there was really, really a rough price to be paid at that point as well.
Exactly. Now, I'm let's jump ahead a little bit because I know Jim and I both have some questions that we're really interested in.
Sure.
That when you get to the end and we're talking about what really happened at the end and the idea of the transference, have you seen indication of that happening in other cases?
I've seen different forms of things like that I would say that experimentation, when cases where, oh God, I got to be really careful with this. Cases where they were not able to lift the demon because of health concerns and whatnot, where they've actually used medications to subdue the demonic. That has happened, yes.
Okay.
So I've seen modern day versions of this as well, yes. And I think maybe even part of that might be connected to this in a way because the research that was done on that individual after the transference actually led to these things that are now somewhat practiced. Now, mind you, this book has been out for over a month. Now, the case, and it's been in the New York Post, it's been in the New York Sun, in the UK Sun. I mean, big stories. I mean, 2-3 page stories in newspapers. Those are huge, by the way. And over 60 million people just in those two newspapers have read those articles. True. Now, the Catholic Church has not come forward to say anything either way.
Right.
Which I kind of expected. That's what, if they disagreed with me, they would come forward and say it.
Well, and
if they don't disagree with you, they stay silent. And I even told you that in the book. I saw that coming beforehand. I knew that's how they would behave.
I've got a question for you, because my wife and I are both Catholic. If there are people in the hierarchy of the church that are in cahoots, so to speak, how do they receive their daily sacraments without it being some inversion?
Well, take a look at the boy receiving sacraments through the possession. The possessed can receive sacraments during those intermittent times. They wouldn't necessarily have to be possessed, for one, number one. I mean, why possess somebody that's participating?
I got you.
Number two, the sacraments wouldn't mean anything to them anyway. I think it's interesting. I think it's interesting in the fact of, well, we know through certain things, and I don't want to give it all away, but we know through certain things and certain, even the Pope in 19 talked about evil entering into the church. I think, it's like with anything, there's good eggs and bad eggs. You know? It's just how the way life goes. You need that balance of good and bad.
Yep. Well, yeah, there's that balance. There's not good without evil and vice versa, so.
Yeah. Did I answer your question, by the way?
Oh, yeah. I was trying to ask questions without giving the book completely away with people that haven't read it. Which,
I know.
Anybody listening to this?
Just for those that haven't read it, we're into territory of, because everything leads up to this, by the way.
Yes.
And when you get to this point, it really becomes as the light bulb goes on.
Yeah.
But, I can give you some examples where, well, has anybody seen the new documentary on Father Malachi Martin?
I haven't yet. I've seen the preview for it, yes.
You need to see it.
Okay.
And, he firmly believed that Satan had entered the hierarchy of parts of the church with the Vatican II. I mean, he really did believe that. And as a matter of fact, he was writing a book that a lot of people talked about that supposedly has disappeared and nobody knows where the manuscript went to at the time of his death. I mean, so, we get into other priests and the idea of how this was worked and how it has been throughout history. But it's really interesting to me And I think it's interesting to the church because the church is a business in a sense, and I don't mean that disrespectfully, but the church is in the business of God, and sometimes the church is in the business of the devil. The devil serves the church well, as well as God serves the church well. Does that make sense?
Well,
because as long as, and Rick said this the other day, as long as the devil is alive and well and out there doing his bidding, the church has a bad guy they can always point to.
Well, right, and they remain relevant as long as the devil's still out there. Yes.
The devil gives them relevance.
And it seems to me that, the more I thought about it, I thought, well, depending on the strength of the demon, transference actually seems to make sense as a way of trying to control that evil.
Yeah, I think when you get down with the boy, I think the boy was almost to the point of perfect possession. Which, you get to that point, there's no turning back. So I think what we see and what has happened was probably a case of they realized they had to do something drastic. I don't think that we should look at them and say that what they did was wrong, because I believe whatever was done, they probably thought they were doing the right thing.
Or had no choice at that point.
Right. For that purpose, I can see that. But but there's abuses that happen because of it, I believe, too. So
yes.
There you go.
I agree with you there. I think one thing that people will be really sort of surprised about are the number of locations in the St. Louis area connected to the case that they've really never heard about either.
Well, what's interesting, what's interesting about that, the diary is very specific. Now, you've seen the shows, the documentaries and such, which they throw out all kinds of places and all kinds of things. It's very specific. Now, remember, this document wasn't for the public. It was an internal church document. It's very specific. It tells you exactly where everything happened. And I think that's interesting because there's so much debate. I'll tell you what, you know this. You walk down the street and go to St. Louis University campus and the students will tell you they had the boy in about 50 different places.
Right.
That boy was exercised in more places than Daniel Boone left. Really.
Yep.
And that was one of the things that I really wanted to clear up, was to get to the story, tell the story, make some analysis too, but actually tell you where it happened and why. And so people would understand that there's a lot of these peripheral things that are just silliness.
And here's another question that is, it's gone around through my head too, is what do you think was the real reason that the demon seemed to want to go to St. Louis specifically? Who was it drawn to there, in your opinion?
Well, I think at that point it had the mother on the trail. Mm-hmm. And it knew that it could get her to do just about anything it wanted. I think maybe that was partially it. But I think to understand the demonic, sometimes we have to take it out of a human sense of understanding, because you have something that knows the next move we're going to make, that knows what you can do for years. And I think in one of the ideas that I was interested in, that interested me and in the questions that it raised, and I think, anytime you write, it does this, but was, did it understand at that point the impact that it would have at later times? Meaning, did it know that, it was going to do this to this boy, and this later it was going to become this book, it was going to become this film that would stand the test of time, that would reach out across? Now, the late William Peter Blatty, rest in peace, he wrote the book and did the film in the thought that he was going to bring people back to the church, and maybe he did to an extent. But however, the other argument is I believe that he made a superstar out of the devil.
Yeah.
And I think maybe the devil, if you want to think of Satan and the devil is that kind of thing, well then, wouldn't it know that that's the doors it was opening? It was the opening of the doors in 1949, which I assume led us to the age of the diabolic. And now we sit in our couches at home and we watch supposed exorcisms happening on television. And we bring the devil into our house for our children to see, fear, and feed it that fear. And
right.
That's not a good thing. Not a good thing.
Not a good thing, but it does serve its purpose.
Well, and we were talking about before we came on, don't you think that a lot of these TV shows that are doing this are leading to the preponderance of DIY home exorcisms?
Well, sure. Definitely. And it's also leading to people out there thinking they're possessed that are not. As well, by the way,
that's true.
That was another thing that I struggled with. Was here I am writing this book. Is what is it going to do to people? And hopefully, it was done in a responsible enough manner. It keeps the devil at bay, but. It's hard to say because anytime you deal with these things, you deal with these cases, you take that chance. So
that's true. Even if you're not talking about the demonic, but whenever you're dealing with paranormal situations, there's a certain number of people who want to be haunted, whether it's by a ghost or a demon, and so.
Well, have you ever had anybody say to you, if you have a demonic case, make sure you call me, or I want to live in a demonic haunting. I've had people say those actual words to me.
I have too, actually. And
that's insanity. I'm like, do you realize what you're asking for? I mean, seriously, have you seen anything? Have you read anything? You're asking for the worst of the worst. But I sometimes believe that those that want to be are not the ones that are going to be.
Oh, I think that's generally true, yeah.
I worked a really good case years ago, and the person in the case, after the case was solved, we met a priest who was an exorcist, by the way. It was a Vatican exorcist. And he said something to her that made her cry. And it was simple. And he explained to her, he goes, it's not the bad people the devil would possess. Why would he possess the bad people? Why would he possess somebody that would follow him? Or why would he possess somebody that would do his bidding? There's no need to. They're already doing the work. The devil possesses those that are godly. And this person had just went through an exorcism and had been possessed. Mm-hmm. And they started to cry because they felt that by them being possessed, they were a bad person. But the truth of it is, they were actually the opposite of it.
Exactly. I mean, it's a line that comes up in cases. In my day job as an attorney, that to be quite frank, say if you're dealing with a rape case, and the issue is whether there's consent or not, and an old policeman said one time, you really have to look at it because you can't rape the willing, and that's, it really applies here. If they're inclined to the devil, then why waste his time and effort possessing?
Right. And I thought that was pretty wise. Well, the ultimate idea is is death. It's actually suicide, really. I mean, the destruction of what God considers good, which is man. In that sense, and gosh knows why he does, but he does.
Well, and that makes much more sense. I think people want to comfort themselves that if I'm a good person and have good intent, then I'm safe from that instead of being the target.
Mm-hmm. Right. You got to watch yourself. You got to watch yourself, and you got to watch the road you travel down.
Oh, very much so.
Be careful.
And, and I know, the circumstances that you went through, I think makes it even more personal as far as understanding that it can happen almost anywhere to anyone.
Yeah, I think that was the thing that, telling the story of this boy wasn't personal to that extent, but there was moments that were very personal in the writing of it, because I could see my own children afraid,
I can imagine.
Going through something. And, you as a parent, I felt extreme empathy for this child, by the way. Extreme empathy. Because I could see the things that he was going through. You kind of relive that. And I think in some ways, maybe that helped with the telling of the story. At least I hope it did. The book's dedicated to him, by the way. And the reason it's dedicated to him is because so many people that should have been there for him were the people that actually let him down. I didn't want to let him down.
And I think that happens in a lot of circumstances, not even, whether it's in the paranormal field or illness or whatever. And you alluded to the fact that perhaps there are people who are dealing with possession or oppression that are treated for mental illness. And I think, that's something that is the hardest thing to figure out is, where is that line? Is it something that is supernatural, or is it a medical condition?
Well, the thing I think about this case that I find really interesting is it's pretty clear cut on that. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of people that will say to you, well, why do you, and I'm like, well, how do we know he wasn't crazy? Or, the thing is this person grew up to work for NASA. Mm-hmm. Stop and consider the clearances he had to go through. The psychological testing that would have been required of him to go through to get those clearances. After this event was done, it was done. He claims he doesn't remember any of it. He went on, he went on to work for NASA and live a very, very normal, consistent life. And I think in this case, that is the most interesting, Lisa, because you have a clear cut that shows, that it definitely was not mental illness, because we would not have seen him grow into what he grew into if it had been.
That's true. And then I also found it interesting that, the psychological testing that was done on him as a child when this was going on, found that there was nothing medically wrong. And I really have to wonder if...
Anxious. They found he was anxious.
Yeah, well, who wouldn't be? But that I thought was really funny, too. My God, I'm sorry.
Oh,
you're fine. But reading that, I had to wonder. Well, if the same situation was presented today, in the climate we have of so many kids being treated for so many different conditions. Emotional conditions, that it's almost routine, that I wonder if it would have been the same diagnoses.
Yeah, well, in some ways you could consider him a poster child for Ritalin, maybe. Seriously, I'm kidding, but, you're right, though. I mean, he probably would have been drugged. He probably would have been institutionalized. And he probably never would have saw the light of day afterwards. I don't think rehabilitation would have came his way in that sense.
And I think that that makes the issue of whether or not there's misdiagnoses even more likely today than 60 years ago, in some ways.
Right. Well, I have a psychologist, well, actually he's a psychiatrist. And he'll tell you that there are cases that come through that, are definitely paranormally related. Mm-hmm. That you have a very hard time explaining it to be anybody else. There's stories that come out of institutions all the time that talk about, there's a certain amount of crazy people in the institution that very well could be possessed. You know, think about this though. This is really interesting. You know, one of the sure ways to get put into an institution is to tell somebody you are the devil, or that you are talking to the devil.
True.
There you go.
Is that your next field research? What was the most, aside from the spiritualist background of the family, what was the most surprising thing that you found going through the records?
I think it becomes a theme in the book too. Was the way he was just absolutely let down by so many people. And another thing that I really thought and saw was the dedication of the priest, the Exorcist himself, Father Balder, and what he does. I mean, because he hit a man that, in all reports, I mean, you know, he lost anywhere, there's some between 35 and 75 pounds, okay? His brother was a doctor. He goes to see his brother. He's got boils all over his body that are oozing boils all over his body. And he doesn't even tell his brother that he's working this case, and this is what it's from. And there's a scene in the book, and I think you guys will remember, where he's kneeling at the side of the bed, and he's fighting for the boy's life, and that struck me as so poignant. And the fact of the matter that this man was willing to sacrifice everything within himself, and I think he even gave part of himself in this case. I mean, because later on we learned that he shows effects from it. I think I think those two are the story. You know, the boy that's let down by everyone that should have upheld him, and the man that fought for him. I mean, you know, going through everything that I've read about both of them and everything that I research about both of them, I mean, this priest should be upper canonization, and he's not, and that frustrates me, by the way.
Well, I agreed with you there, and it especially seeing that made imprint on me was, you know, him later on, them saying that he'd have physical effects before going to Mass, to the point that younger priests were afraid he was drinking or something, and
right, they were afraid he was drunk.
Yeah.
And they were told, once he goes through Mass, he'll be fine, and he was. Interesting enough, the first book signing I did was here in St. Louis at a place called Left Egg Book, and there was a person in the audience that went to St. Louis University High School. Now, Father Balder was part of St. Louis University. What was interesting about it is that student talks how the students were never allowed to talk to him. And the reason they were told not to talk to him, they weren't allowed to talk to him, is because of the exorcism and all of the effects that he had on him. And that was during a book signing, by the way. But the evidence does suggest out there, and everything that you can research on him, that, he definitely brought some effects back out with it.
Do you think maybe they're not trying to go through the canonization process because they would have to admit to some of the things that you allude to towards the end of the book?
It's part of the smoke screen of it all, isn't it? I think that was it. I think they keep trying to keep this from being talked about, and I think, you know what I think. I talk about it. There's a lot of misinformation that's fed, out there. As a matter of fact, even there was even some that came through, Father Halloran, for one thing. I mean, at one point he'll say that this happened there, and then at one point he'll say this happened here, I think a lot of that was fed to put the smoke screen up to keep people from getting into the reality of it all. I think it's part of it.
question.
Sure.
I was recently just speaking about your book to some people, and we were talking about the fact that the Catholic Church was so involved, and the fact that I'm Catholic and Jim is Catholic, and the question was posed to me, and I'm interested to hear what you think. They said, why does it always seem like any demonic possession or anything that has to do with demons or anything else, the Catholic Church is always involved?
Well, that's not true, though. That's not true. That's what is perceived. It's a perceived a misperception, actually, because the truth of the matter is every religion has its form of possession and exorcism, pretty much. If you go over to the Middle Eastern countries, you have the jinn, and and when we were talking about the dipping box, you realize that a rabbi performed the exorcism there. I mean, so all of these religions have the same thing, However, the Catholics, I think, get the idea, placed on them, maybe even more so because of this case, maybe. But the truth of the matter is all major forms of religion have forms of this, even evangelical, obviously. Mm-hmm. I mean, I participated in an exorcism years ago that we couldn't bring a priest into it for certain reasons, and so we had to go to evangelical. So, I mean, it does happen. And I think it's always been funny to me, and even to priests and exorcists themselves, that people believe that the Catholics have the corner on exorcism when it's God that has the corner on it, not Catholic.
Right.
Or Lutherans, or, you know what I'm saying?
Yes,
right,
exactly.
Right. But I think in the Western world, the Catholic Church has been doing this for 2,000 years, longer than other denominations, and so, plus, I think...
Well, wait a second. I will disagree with you there. I mean, there's some religions that predate Christianity that were also doing it as well.
Oh, yeah.
So,
I agree with you there.
Yeah, I mean, this is the idea is an ancient. I guess what the gist of it is this is an ancient idea. Mm-hmm. It's an idea that has been around for almost as long as man. Really. I mean, as long as we were walking, thinking beings. This has been a part of it, and it's not always been Catholicism was the basis of it. By the way, I'm not Catholic, and people always find that shocking.
Well,
I'm a good Protestant boy.
Well, in this area, Catholic or Catholicism is not the prominent religion in this area, and it can be. A lot of people in this area don't understand the Catholic religion, nor do they care to take the time to understand the Catholic religion. So I found it kind of interesting that those people that I was speaking to at that moment, which there happened to be 3 people, are not the first people to have said that to me.
But I think that's media.
It's the media. Yeah, exactly. It's that popular idea, and I think this case has a lot to do with it. I mean, really, when you think of exorcism, now you say exorcism to something, and I guarantee you the majority of people in this world think the priest and the power of Christ compels you.
Yeah.
Well, I think too, this case and the movie, in a way, made Priest some sort of a superhero.
You could say that, absolutely. Absolutely they made him Superman. But I would have to say to you that if there is a hero involved in all of this, that it was the exorcist himself, it was the priest, Father Ballard. I would call him a superhero, wouldn't you?
Right.
Oh,
yes,
absolutely.
The best of humanity. The best of humanity is being shown by this man during that point.
Right.
That superhero stamina for me.
Well, and I think it's also something that most people don't understand. It's almost they think that this would be the first, quote, modern possession in America or whatever. And you mentioned the Roth case, and in the book from the 1860s, and
right. There's also a 1939 case out of Iowa with the knot.
Yeah, and then but I one thing with the Roth case that I always found interesting is you had Mary Roth, and then that and I forget the other family's name that the girl that Mary's spirit channeled through. And,
it's Lancy Venom, is it?
Yeah, Venom. That's it. And so in a way, it's almost a more complicated situation than this one, and most people aren't aware of. And then, of course, the German case. That's the basis of the Emily Rose book and movie,
which we discussed in the book too.
Right.
I don't think, Lisa. I don't think you could discuss one of these cases without discussing all of them.
And I think that's the thing, is that when that there is a pattern when you look at these situations, and they're so much different than typical hauntings or paranormal cases, and there are things that are very different from I don't want to say typical, but the general mental illness situation.
Well, somebody the other day said something to me that I thought was pretty interesting. This is not me saying it, it was somebody else. They called him the haunted boy for a while.
Right.
That was based on an article that was written a few years back, and then it was picked up by others. But the fact of the matter is the person, that was saying this to me said to me, why did they call him the haunted boy? He wasn't haunted. A haunting and demonic possession are two very different things, and they were right. Mm-hmm. They were very different. It was Rick that actually said it. He was reading the book, and he just said to me, the room I said it, and I'm like, well, yeah, you did. But, he was like, but they're very two different things, and I'm like, well, yeah, that's true. I mean, I think that is something that people have to understand. When we talk about ghosts and hauntings, we are talking about something totally different. Mm-hmm. This is a different animal. It walks and talks and acts differently.
Exactly, and that's what people don't seem to understand. We're kind of winding down here, Stephen. We're going to wind up. But again, we invite everyone to come out next Saturday, meet Stephen, either at the library in Joplin at 2 o'clock, or come out to the Kendrick House and have an investigation. Check out the Paranormal Science Lab Facebook page and website for details. And we are really excited to have you down, Stephen.
Well, I can't wait to get there. I can't wait to see everybody.
It's going to be a good time. And thank you so much for talking to us tonight.
Oh, absolutely. It's always great to talk to you.
Oh, and same here. We always love having you on. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen.
Thank you.
All right, talk to you later.
Okay, bye-bye.